Chelo, aspetta.
In India right now, we have a situation where the mainstream political party in power is a right-wing party, which articulates a very strong, what we call Hindutva ideology. By that I mean an assertion of Hindu patriarchal power. India has had a long history of colonization, of partition, of the creation of separate states based on Muslim and Hindu religions. Prior to that, of Buddhism, this is really not the time for me to give you a whole history lesson in India right now, but just to give you a little bit of context, the assertion of the right-wing Hindu ideology right now is very similar to what we're experiencing in other parts of the world with the assertion of right-wing ideology recently in the U.S. with the whole sort of Christian right, in various parts of the Middle East with particular notions of Islam being articulated in a certain way. And so in the context of the assertion of a majority dominant notion of patriarchal power, what happens is that minority groups tend to end up being victimized, oppressed, and exploited in different kinds of ways. Even when that dominant power is not being expressed in a particularly ideological way, it is always difficult for minority communities to articulate their sense of identity in a majority context. Many of us in this room know that experience, understand that experience. Right now, minority communities in India, not just minority communities, but other communities like Dalits, like Adivasi communities who are also called tribals, are really in a state of siege, a real sense of disempowerment and attack at the hands of the Hindu right. When that happens, one of the groups that becomes a further casualty of this kind of assertion of identity is women. It's always on women's backs that cultural identity, national identity, patriarchal ideology asserts and articulates itself. One of the most extreme examples that we're witnessing right now is in Afghanistan. But shades of Afghanistan happen to women everywhere that they are, in a dominant community, but particularly if their identity intersects with that of a racial minority or a religious minority or any other minority community. And so the idea of understanding human rights in an intersectional way is something that most women who come from communities that are not communities in the majority articulate instinctively. Because at any given point, no minority woman is just a woman. She's a woman of color, she's an immigrant woman, she's a Hindu, a Muslim woman, she's a Dalit woman, she's many other things other than her gender identity. But similarly, one can't really talk about any identity in isolation. None of us is just one part of ourselves. When we are oppressed as a minority, we articulate that part of ourselves which is oppressed the most strongly. But in doing that, what we often end up doing is ignoring the other parts of ourselves, or other communities that are just as oppressed. And it's not okay to assert a Dalit identity, but say that Dalit women, therefore, can be excluded from that assertion of human rights. It's not okay to assert a Muslim identity and say it's okay then, therefore, for certain cultural notions of Islam to be played out in the backs of women's lives, simply because we are under siege against the majority. What we did with this music video, and there is a connection here, is that it is inspired by the true life story of a Muslim woman in India, in the state of Ahmedabad. Shamim Pathan, whose name appears at the end of that music video, spoke at a tribunal that was convened by an organization called Sanchetna that tried to bridge that gap between gender and minority identity. What they did was hold a hearing where Muslim women talked about the oppression that they experience at home, in the private space, as well as the oppression that they experience as Muslim women vis-a-vis the majority community. And it was a very important and critical attempt at bringing those different identities together and saying, as Muslim women, we will no longer only speak as this or this. This is the whole of ourselves. It was a very radical political thing to do at the time in India. This was a year and a half ago. Because when women speak out as Muslim women, they deal with the backlash of the clergy leadership, of the mullahs, of the fundamental leadership of the Muslim community. And they also deal with the backlash of the Hindutva community, of the Hindu ideology and the Hindu right. And so, making those connections and speaking of those human rights is a very politically powerful statement at this point, because basically what it does is say, it's not this or this, it's all of us together. And at the end of the music video, saying that this music video, which is celebrating women's rights, is inspired by the true life story of a Muslim woman. The video makes that statement in a slightly different way. It has been picked up, it has been noticed. When we first put that tagline at the end of the video, a lot of people tried to persuade us to take it off because they were scared that we were going to start communal riots. Because the video, as innocuous as it is also a very subversive video. You're watching that video at the same time as you're watching, women in mini dresses dancing around trees or doing their little dance numbers and discos, which is what they usually do in most music videos. So this music video is on MTV, Channel V, 6 music channels, alongside all of these other music videos that we were talking about earlier. But what it's saying is, here's an articulation and a celebration of women's identity that is different. Not only is it different, it's actually inspired by the life of a Muslim woman. And all of the stereotypes around Muslim women, beaten down, veiled, garbed, unable to speak, unable to do anything, are also then destroyed in just making that simple statement. Shamim herself played a very big role in the promotion of the album and the video. She was on, television interviews, and she was very vocal. And in her own life, in her own testimony, what was really amazing was how she spoke of being a Muslim woman, the daughter of 8 children, the only girl. She had a love marriage. She got married to a man who assumed that because she had 7 brothers, he didn't have to work. So she fought to have a marriage of her own choosing, but then ended up in a situation where she was experiencing all kinds of abuse because the expectation was that the male side of her family would take care of her and her son. She finally walked out, tried all kinds of different businesses, and then became a matador taxi driver. You have those here, they're called minors. Have any of you been in the combis? The ones that pick up lots of people? So she drives one of those big cabs that picks up like 30, 40 people at a time and does all of the routes that the traditional cab routes in India don't do. So she doesn't just drive any old cab. She always has a hockey stick with her to protect herself. And she hears all of these different stories of women's lives because they find a woman driving them around the place in this matador taxi. We took poetic license and we made her a truck driver in the video. But that's really kind of where she's at and where she comes from. And the power of her life story has been a very important way for us to show how these intersections happen in people's lives and how we have to talk about caste, gender, race, minority status, and all of those things simultaneously. And we've just been nominated for the MTV Awards. So please pray for us. September 5th is when they get announced, but it's great that we got nominated anyway. This song is inspired by the true life story of a Muslim woman in Ahmedabad. You all heard me talk about that, right? That's why you all came in, so I don't need to repeat that bit anyway. It's inspired by this woman who testified at this hearing in Ahmedabad. And the lyrics basically say, The boughs, the sand dunes are all celebrating with me, are all caressing my cheeks and celebrating that I have now become my own person. The other day I was sitting in my room in solitude by myself, and all of the elements of nature converged into this storm and entered my being. And I saw the world with my own eyes. I spoke with my own voice, and I realized that my true friend and my companion lay within myself. The rhythm of my mind has begun to be my feet which have forgotten how to walk. I started to dance in the first verse.